We are live with SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. Today we have a really fun topic and a couple of fun guests slash co-hosts. So let me first welcome my co-host Shannon Liner. Shannon, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Shannon is a professional athlete, also a PhD and a SCI network person as well. So she's well familiar with the things we talk about and deal with. And we have Duncan Fletcher of Game Change, whose specialty is in athlete development. Welcome, Duncan.
Thanks very much, Josh. I'm glad to be on SCI TV.
So, Duncan, what got you into this whole space of athlete development? Give a little intro to who you are and how you got to be who you are.
It's a great, it's a long story and probably not that interesting, but I'll try and give you the Coles notes here as quickly as I can. I fell into the field of athlete development kind of by accident. I was doing my master's at Quinnipiac University and got involved in research around working with NHL alumni and examining what were the challenges and issues that they were having when they were transitioning out of sport. And as part of that research project, we got involved with the NHL Alumni Association and the National Hockey League, and we were looking at, what are some of the challenges and how can they be addressed. And as a result of the research that we did and my background in hockey at the time, I was currently coaching Division I hockey at Quinnipiac, and with the research, and they came to me and they said, hey, would you be interested in running an institute focused on athletic transition for NHL alumni? And obviously I was going to hop at the opportunity, and that's essentially what I did. And that research and being involved with hockey led me right into the field that I'm currently in right now. So it was kind of a serendipitous, right place, right time, but it's been a blast since I've been involved.
So can you set the stage for Shannon and I here a little bit about what we're talking about when we're talking about athlete development? Because I think a lot of people start to think about the physical attributes only, and I think you're talking about a much broader space than that.
Absolutely. If you really want to look at it, most people, when they think of athlete development, they're thinking of run farther, throw farther, skate faster, shoot harder. In fact, I think those are key components in a lot of ways, but they're not necessarily the primary driver of athlete development, how I view it and how a lot of the people I work with view it. Athlete development, and actually going to borrow a term that I think I heard you say, is that it's dealing with issues that are neck up. So what's taking place between the athlete's ears is an important component. The other piece is helping the athlete manage what's going on in his life. And I think we all know that peak performance is derived not only from what's taking place physically, but it's also what's taking place mentally and how the athlete's life is being managed around them. So we view athlete development almost from a holistic perspective. The idea is that athlete development isn't just what you're doing physically. It really is looking at the whole life of the athlete and figuring out what can be managed, what can be improved, so that we're going to result in outcomes that not only impact performance, but from our perspective, create an opportunity for an athlete to have a more effective career, leverage that career more effectively, and then be able to transition out of sport into other opportunities that they're interested in pursuing beyond athletics. So that's kind of how we view athlete development. It's this broader, almost like a cradle-to-grave approach as it relates to working with athletes.
Okay, so let's think about it from two perspectives. I've noticed you have one perspective, which could be if you're an athlete, you want to be completely engaged in sport. You want to be resting all the time. Everything you do is completely involved in sport. But then you have another perspective or theory where you can be involved in sport, but at the same time you can balance other things and other passions in your life with a mixture of, for example, could be like family, maybe another job you have, maybe school. So what kind of perspective does Game Change have, and you personally?
My personal approach really relies on the idea that if you're talking to a professional athlete, you can't communicate to them that somehow, in some way, shape, or form, that what you're talking about in terms of life after sport is more important than their career. It's a ridiculous thing to try and communicate to an athlete. And if you're talking to a younger athlete, what's even more ridiculous is talking to them about the end of their career. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, is that no athlete wants to talk about their funeral. They want to talk about where they are now. They're living a dream at this particular moment in time. And if you're going to communicate to them, and the only way you can communicate with them is about the end and preparing for the end, and the end is coming, and they're not going to take you seriously. And I think what we really advocate is you want to meet the athlete where they're at. Again, that's probably an overused cliche in the industry, but the idea is, can we give information to the athlete that gets them excited about exploring something beyond sport, while having the entire message being that we care about you being the best athlete you can be now. We want to drive performance now. So what we advocate is meshing those two worlds, is giving the athlete tools that allows them to succeed now, today, be a better performer, be a better athlete, but also allows them to at least get introduced to and think about what may exist beyond their sport today. So that's really the objective.
So when you're talking about athletes, are there hooks to help them understand that this can be more than just planning for your funeral? And is there a performance connection between the things that are happening off the field or off the ice and things that are happening on the field or on the ice?
Well, I think there's definitely a connection. I mean, the problem is you're always like, well, what level of connection exists? And how close is that connection? So I think from our perspective and from Game Change's perspective is the approach that we take is we kind of term it as a nonlinear approach. And the nonlinear means is that for example, just using a round number, let's say for every 10 messages you're sending to an athlete, only 2 of those messages should maybe have something to do with, leveraging their athletic career to beyond the sport or talking about the end of their career. The rest of those messages really need to be designed to engage and allow the athlete to interact on something they may be interested in that isn't necessarily tied directly to their transition or preparing for life beyond athletics, but it's really just about getting them excited about something else completely unrelated to sport. And if we can get those athletes engaged in something that's unrelated to sport, get excited about it, well, now you're going to have a common platform which you can engage in that or engage that athlete with, and that's going to lead to other conversations and hopefully other interests that will allow them to actually leverage those whatever other interests they may have and help leverage that beyond the game. And I think that's really the key is to so for example, if you're talking to a 24-year-old athlete, their primary focus is, I got to stay in the league, or I got to stay at the absolute upper echelon of my career. That's what they're really focused on. So it's key that any athlete development specialist who wants to interact with a high profile or an elite level athlete is when you're coming through the door and you're kicking it down is your first message should be, my primary objective is to help you succeed being an athlete. And if you can come through the door on most occasions and speak to an athlete in that framework, then any other messaging that you're going to bring to the table is going to be that much better received. So I think that's sort of the philosophy that we're operating on is we know that there's different segments of athletes, and I think that's one of the key things is trying to target our message so that it makes sense for each particular segment of athletes. Yeah, there's a lot of talking, so I just throw you guys off there.
No, not at all. So when you think about the different perspectives that are there, so that makes a lot of sense from an athlete's perspective, why an athlete could care or should care. But a lot of times I imagine the programs and the things that are being funded are not being funded directly by athletes, but by leagues and teams and athletic directors at the college level. Why should they care? Why is this something they should invest in?
It's a great question. I mean, it's an ongoing battle. Is how do you? One of the challenges in the space as it relates to athlete development is how do you communicate the return on investment? How can a league understand that if I'm investing, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars into a program, how do I know that I'm getting a return for those millions of dollars when the only really way to measure it is, well, maybe some guy didn't do something that resulted in something bad. So it's very difficult to kind of go, oh, well, this is the ROI. But I think if you want to look at it from a very sort of simple approach is that if you view professional sports and professional athletes as a product that's being consumed, then you got to argue if you're going to have better people, then arguably those better people are going to be more inclined to perform better. And if you have better people who are performing better, then arguably you've got a better product. If you have a better product, then more people are going to want to see it and want to be engaged in it. So I think in terms of the communication that we would want to, share with a college, or if we want to share it with a professional sports league, is do you want a better product? And we think that by investing in athlete development, you're creating the opportunity to build a better product, and if you have a better product, hopefully more people are going to want to kick down your door and see what you have to offer.
When you present these types of scenarios to maybe like the NHL, would you talk about integrating athletes into communities? Is that like one of the examples that you would provide? Like, how much are you guys trying to get athletes to be more involved within their city and really be involved in like creating almost like a backing or creating kind of their own network?
I think our objective isn't to create sort of broad-based programming that promotes engagement in the community. I think our objective is to really serve the needs of the individual athlete. And one of the other things in terms of our approach is that we believe in a highly customized approach for each individual athlete. We find that group-oriented stuff typically doesn't have the staying power of working individually with a particular athlete. So our approach is, if you're working with an athlete and they come to you and they're like, hey, we really want to do X in the community, we really want to engage in the community, our reaction to that is, that's fantastic. We think that that provides a huge benefit, not only to the athlete, but to the community that athlete's living in or wherever they're looking to do good. Because I think that the key is doing it on the terms that the athlete wants to do it. So we really believe in if an athlete wants to do it, we'll customize approach, working with the appropriate experts to make it happen. But we never push it on any particular athlete. So our goal really is to, if an athlete wants to do it, then we're going to figure out a way to facilitate it and make it work for him or her in the best way possible.
So not to focus too much on the negative, but what are some of the problems that arise when a league or a team or a college don't invest in athlete development? If they just say, look, these are grown men and women for the most part who are managing their own careers, and let them figure it out on their own. What are some of the downsides in that approach?
That's a great question. Again, I mean, I think the challenge is how do you measure a negative outcome? What is a negative outcome, and how can that be accounted for? And I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. So you have the idea that there's a lot of athletes who are going broke and they are getting divorced. I think the number that you hear all the time is 78% of players are divorced or broke within 2 or 3 years of leaving the game. Well, those numbers are complete and total fallacies. They're not accurate in any way, shape, or form. There's absolutely nothing to support that in the literature, in the academic literature. So those numbers are a complete joke. In reality, what we're talking about are, for athletes, aren't athletes that are cratering and becoming, living under a bridge or having, major life difficulties. Although, don't get me wrong, those do happen. Really, what we're talking about is reducing the time frame when an athlete leaves the game and having to deal with those critical stressors. Like, you're coming out of the game, and obviously that's a massive challenge. Preparing for that is highly stressful, and then most of the time, careers don't end on a schedule. You don't know when your career is going to come to an end. It usually just ends when you hit in a brick wall. So I think really what athlete development services do is they help athletes while they're active, and then obviously when they're in transition. What athlete development does is it really compresses the time frame that an athlete's able to get back on their feet. I mean, you hear anecdotally it's 3 to 5 years for an athlete to transition out of the game and be ready to go. But if we can shrink that, where it's only 6 months and they're ready to pursue another opportunity, well, I think what's cool about that is you're making that athlete far more effective, not only for his family, for himself, for his community. You're really empowering the athlete to succeed right after his sport and leverage his sport experience in a better way. So I think what I would say is that if you really want to, if you're a league or you're a college and you want to really kind of go, well, what's the ROI for engaging and doing this kind of work? Really what you're doing is you're empowering these folks to go out and be better and be stronger and more successful coming out of the game. And if they're able to do that, then the outcomes that they're going to provide not only to themselves and they're basically going to have a better impact in a shorter time frame. I think that's really what you want to boil it down to, is that the impact they can have is far more significant in a shorter time frame if you do if you invest in your athletes.
So you talk about trying to shrink this 3-year transition down to like 3 months, for example. Well, that's not really intuitive, and that's why we need, athlete development. And I think that you're making a great point and like on advocating for game change. But I'm wondering, like, what kind of skills then do you teach? Because it's not always, like I said, intuitive. And also, are there any type of like mentorships? Because I know in my experience, mentorship's been a huge piece, and as I've transitioned from pro athlete to academics and beyond. So what kind of skills are you guys wanting to teach?
Well, again, it depends on the individual athlete. It's kind of the approach that we have, is that every athlete is going to have a particular path that they want to travel, that they're excited about. And our objective is, how do we help those athletes meet those particular skill gaps? What do they need? What are the networks that they need to tie into in order to have success where they want to go? So it's really driven by the individual, from my perspective. So we're not saying Game Change doesn't have 6 or 7 different things that we're automatically going to communicate to an athlete or share with an athlete. We kind of boil it down to the individual. What does the individual want to accomplish? What are the individual's goals? How does it tie into their family? How does that tie into their community? And really, what are they excited about? So that's kind of where we focus it from that perspective, having the individual drive where they move forward. So that's really the key approach that we bring to the table, is have it driven by the individual and not try and have a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to engaging with athletes.
Now, Duncan, what are some examples of where this has really made an impact and change? And now, fully recognize you probably can't share specific names, but at least a profile or two of where you've engaged with someone and we've seen that they've gone from where they were to a much better place in terms of whether it's transition or even just their engagement within their sport itself.
Well, I think one of the things that I always get excited about, that I see, is that when you have an athlete who's actively playing, they get excited about something that they maybe hadn't thought they would have been excited about. So, for example, I've worked with a gentleman who is very interested in finance. And this individual started with no education, basically from scratch. And he was able to earn a college degree while playing professional sports. He's still active. And then what we were able to do with him is, he didn't know where he wanted to go in the finance world. So by, again, working with understanding his reality from his family perspective, he was a young guy, but he had young kids. He was very interested in finance, but again, he didn't know where he wanted to go. So what we were able to do is help him identify, by having him interact with different experts in the field, network appropriately. He was actually able to figure out that, what, I'm not into equity, I'm not into bonds, I'm really interested in private equity as sort of as a way to go. So I guess that's a great example of a guy who understood that he needed education. What we were able to do is broker his education for him. We were able to help him identify where he wanted to go in terms of the financial side of things, by having him network and engage with different people that otherwise he would not have been able to get access to. So I think that's a case where you have a guy who has a very specific objective where he wants to go but didn't know how to get there. And we were able to get him not only the skill set, but we were able to get him the experiences so that he could make a strong decision about where he wanted to go when he eventually leaves the game. And I kind of want to circle back just real quick to Shanna's point about peer-to-peer or mentorship, I think you had talked about. And I think that's a key piece of it as well, is where if you can provide opportunities for athletes to engage with other athletes who have been down a particular road, whether it be somebody that's gone down finance or somebody that understands the importance of preparing for a career transition and leveraging where they are now, that's a hugely powerful approach, and we see a lot of leagues are migrating to that right now. So, for instance, the LPGA is heavily involved in a peer mentoring program within the league to help athletes break into the professional tour and understand the challenges of being on tour. The NFL does a lot on the other side of that, where they're actually having, I believe they call them NFL ambassadors, who work with players and help them understand how to transition out of the game. So I think on those two facets, those are an example where you have success, and then you have the aspect of the peer-to-peer, which I think is another way to really kind of drive outcomes for athletes.
So a lot of what you describe reminds me of my college advisors, or mentors that are in my college. And so you make a really great example of someone who almost went straight from high school into a pro environment, where they had to kind of skip that whole college environment that's set up for learning and setting up for almost like athletic development. So what would be an argument then for why game change might be important in a college setting, or is it kind of do you guys view it maybe as replacing that college setting for just people that for athletes that went straight from high school into pro?
It's a great, I mean, you know what, I don't really have an easy answer for that. I mean, I actually never interacted with my guidance counselor at school, at either high school or college, so that might explain where I am, where I'm at. But I think the difference that athlete development, I think, can make is that athletes obviously are developing a very unique skill set, and that they're, in a lot of ways, they're punished for it, because it's, you know, you're practicing 20 hours a week, or, you know, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, if you're playing a major Division I sport, you're probably doing more than that, even though, you know, you're limited in terms of the number of hours that you're allowed to do, but you're always way more invested in your sport. So I think the key is, at for the athlete perspective, a traditional college guidance counselor, or whatever terminology you want to use, is they really can't speak to the athletic experience, and they really can't help the athlete put into context what transferable skills they've been able to derive from their sport experience. So I think that's a key aspect of it as well, is from a college perspective, is the transition difficulties for collegiate athletes, I think, are just as strong as a lot of professionals. Obviously, it's a little bit more intense when you've been earning your living on it, but a lot of the challenges faced by collegiate athletes in many ways are analogous to what college athletes go through. So I think there's a value in having a very athlete-specific approach to working with collegiate athletes, and I think athletic departments should be cognizant of that. They don't think right now they are. I think they can think, you know, they can pretend to talk about footballs and baseballs and soccer balls, and that, oh well, then that's going to, you know, because we use those as analogies to communicate, you know, transition stuff or development stuff to collegiate athletes. That covers it. It really doesn't. So I think a specific approach makes a lot of sense for college.
And Duncan, with the college community, we know that the vast majority of collegiate athletes, even exceptional athletes, are not going to go on and be professional in their sport. You know, it's really 98% are not going to be. And yet, if you ask a lot of the athletes, you will get a much different number coming back. So we've done this with D1 football programs, where we've asked, and we'll say, how many of you, 110 of you, are going to be drafted next year in the spring? And something like 80% of them, right, 85% will say, yeah, we're going to be drafted. And when I've talked to athletic directors, they'll say, well, we're in a weird dilemma, because on the one hand, we know that's not true. On the other hand, it's not our job to squash dreams or to do anything that's going to undermine the commitment that someone is putting into their sport, because we need them performing at a very high level in that sport. Are there ways that you're able to take the athlete development needs and those tasks and meld them into the things that are also really necessary for success in that sport, so that they're getting the lessons they need for after sport, but not necessarily thinking about it in that framework, that they actually think they're developing skills that are primarily sport specific, but you are setting them up for success afterward?
I think there is, and I think the key to it really boils down to, you have to be able to integrate directly with the university, with a coach, with a team, in order to really wrap your arms around what are they trying to do, what are they trying to accomplish, what do you want your athletes to get out of a particular experience, both from athletically and academically, and what do you want the outcome to be? So I think the answer is absolutely yes, but I think it's almost malpractice to be like, oh, well, you know, here's a set way to do it and another set way to do it. It's very, very custom to the particular culture, the team, the environment, what the coach is looking to do. So my initial reaction is unequivocally yes, but I think it's always going to boil down to the individual institution in terms of what you put together for them in order to get the outcomes you want. Because I think cookie cutter in this business, in my experience, has never worked particularly well. I think when you do the cookie cutter, you're just trying to put a Band-Aid on it, and you're not really going to get the outcomes you want.
And there was an interesting story at the professional level that was in the Boston Globe a couple weeks ago, and it was Tuukka Rask, very large, tall hockey player, and he's injured. And so he tried to figure out how to make that injury time more productive than just sitting around rehabbing. And so he went out and he got his real estate license, right? He took the exam, studied for it, and got the license. And one of the first times I saw an article like this out in the paper, in a major newspaper, and I thought that was really interesting. And I was trying to, pull that thread a little bit with you to see, are there opportunities like that where you find natural moments in someone's career where they're more ripe and receptive to that type of messaging? Because that to me was such an interesting image of, here's Tuukka Rask. Was he 6'9"?
Yeah, you're thinking of Zdeno Chara. Yeah, I saw.
Yes, right. You're right.
Oh, yeah.
So here's Chara. He's right, 6'9", right? He's going to be, constantly studying for his real estate license, showing you properties. I don't know, but I love the image of it, right? Of that happening.
And I think that's a thing with sport. I mean, I think there are times when you're injured. There are times when maybe you're getting scratched. You're not going to be playing on a regular basis. And I think the key is to provide an opportunity for athletes to feel empowered to pursue these different avenues, and understand that it's not going to necessarily, well, let me rephrase that. It's not going to negatively impact their playing career by exploring something beyond the game. I had a guy tell me, it was hilarious. He started taking a course, and he did one, and then he did another, and he did this towards the tail end of his career, and he was just like, at the end of it, he's like, I've done like a year. He said, if I started this when I was 21, I'd be like a neurosurgeon right now. And I think that's the key, is that there is so much downtime in professional athletics that if athletes are empowered to take advantage of that time, and they learn that not only is it not going to negatively impact their play, but in fact there's a lot of evidence that suggests that it may actually improve it. There's a study out of Australia recently that talked about how athletes engaging in hobbies and education and things beyond sport actually has a significant positive impact on their level of performance. So I think by getting athletes to hear those messages, getting general managers and coaches to hear those messages, and then obviously in the collegiate context, coaches and athletic directors, I think you're talking about an opportunity for people to understand that there is huge value in engaging in those kinds of things. So for Zdeno Chara to go out and do his real estate certificate while he's injured, I think is a great way not only for him to reduce his stress, or not only it's a great way to reduce his stress and have something to fall back on, but it's going to make him a better athlete because he's not going to be freaking out about his knee. He's going to be able to focus on his rehab. So unequivocally, I think that's a huge way that that athlete development can insert itself into the process to impact athletes and organizations in a better way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I feel like an injury and that downtime that is a result of an injury is the perfect time to help strengthen your mind and build your mind in other ways, and even maybe build your mind towards improving your athletics on the field or on the ice eventually, and once you get healthy. There's a woman, a professional track athlete out of New York, who got, I think she got 16th at the Olympic trials in 2012, and then after that experience, she thought to herself, maybe this is my limitations. Like maybe this is the limit that my body is going to go. Like you have to get top 3 to make the Olympics, which was her dream. She gets 16th. She doesn't make the Olympics. She kind of like loses faith in her dreams. So she goes and gets her master's in engineering. And as she's like working in this huge engineering firm, she decides that like she finds that she does have this passion for track, and she is now on a roll and trying to, again, she qualified for the Olympic trials. And so it's just interesting how sometimes going beyond a sport can bring you kind of back to it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I've seen. I mean, I've seen it on multiple occasions where I've had athletes engaged in courses that have had massive performance spikes in a very short time frame, and like, what's going on? Well, they're they're reducing their stress because they're now got something else they can focus on that isn't necessarily 100% on the sport. Because focusing all the time on one thing, it's exhausting. So I think that's a great story, and I think that ties in a lot of the things that I've seen in terms of how you can get these sort of performance spikes by engaging in stuff beyond the sport that you're playing.
It's definitely a careful balance, though. I mean, I would argue that you can't go too much. You can't like lose your priority on your sport because your performance. I've seen it the opposite too, where your performance is completely compromised because of maybe you start engaging in a hobby or a job, and you're end up, making that a priority.
I'm seeing definitely a danger. I think that's. And that's why I think from an athlete development specialist perspective is that always has to be your default, is that you always want to default to less is more in terms of outside influences when you're dealing with a professional athlete, because you can never come to them and say, hey, this really needs to be your number one focus, when it just can't be, because their focus has to be on the field, on the court, on the ice. It's their job, and that's what they're there to do. But I think those small steps over a long period of time, whether it's a year, 2 years, 10 years as a professional career, can have a massive impact not only on performance, but it can have a massive impact on the level of success an athlete has, not only in their career away from the playing surface, but after their career when they're completely removed from a sport context.
I do think what you're both on right now is so critical, because there is absolutely a mythology that the only way to succeed in sport is to be completely one-dimensionally focused on that sport. And yet the examples you're providing, I think, are pretty good illustrations that that's not true. And we've all seen this in our lives, right? Of folks who, when they only have that sport, it puts so much pressure on that sport, and they play tight, and everything is amplified in a negative way when it's going poorly, that they can't bring that resilience and that rebound effect back into their sport. And yet when folks have other things going on, you're really impressed by what they're able to balance. And often what I'll see, though, is those same people will convince themselves, okay, it's going well now with these other things. If I just drop those other things, now imagine how well I'll do at sport this time. And they go back to unilateral focus, and sport suffers again, right? And so how do we educate coaches and families and significant others, everyone else, that there is a certain balance that's probably pretty healthy for most folks? And what are some of the ways that we can go out there and help people know that that's not the only way to succeed on the field, is by being one-dimensional, 24/7, 365?
I think that there's a couple of different perspectives, I think, on that. My first reaction is that coaches can be a nightmare in that regard. In terms of the pressure they put on athletes. I mean, even at the collegiate level, it's a huge challenge. One of my favorite stories is this is going back a long time, not naming names, but there was a college coach who would get in front of his team and he'd be like, okay, guys, I want everybody to know that academics here is number 1, and hockey is number, did I just blow that? No, I didn't. Hockey is number 2, and you throw the one finger up. So the idea is that you'd have this coach who would be kind of deliberately saying that hockey was above and beyond the most important thing for his young athletes. You got a major issue there. But I think my perspective on it is really at the end of the day, you have to break through to these key decision makers, these key influencers, and have them understand that it isn't just about what's taking place on the field that matters. It's also about trying to impact these people beyond the field to build better people for the long term. And I think coaches understand that, but they just need to be given the message that it isn't going to result in some guy having a terrible game because he just happened to spend 45 minutes, spending some time reading a book about a literature book. So, I mean, it's such a difficult issue, but it's also so easy. And I think that's the crazy thing about the space, is you got to figure out how to crack that nut. And it's not necessarily easy, but it's in steps and phases and getting those key contacts to break, as it were.
And Shannon, did you deal with some of this? I mean, you went out and got a PhD in the middle of your athletic career here. That's not easy to do. Did you face coaches and others who said, well, you're not committed to your track and field career, and this is just a sign that you don't have that passion or that fire?
Yes, I have. And I just kind of shake my head the whole time throughout this conversation because I definitely fall on the theory of, like, it's important to have balance, and it's important to obviously find the right amount of balance and not go one way, to not, prioritize things outside of sport too much because it could compromise your athletics. But just some quick examples would be when I was working on my PhD, I ran my PR. I ran a 2:01, and then I thought to myself exactly what you said. I'm going to not have to work on this dissertation anymore. I'm gonna have more time to dedicate towards my sport, and I haven't run as fast. Like, I've run maybe half a second from it, but at the same time, I was expecting breakthroughs once I quit my PhD. So that was kind of shocking. And then another example would be just like the coaches and the experience you have through relationships you have that you build through a coach. So, for example, one of my post-collegiate coaches was, I pretty much get cut from teams because I'm not performing, but then I have another coach, and even though I haven't maybe performed as well, it's not about that, it's about building the person, and I think that's a lot of, like, what I need, and I think a lot of athletes need, and that's, I think, what Game Change would provide, is just like, yeah, of course, you're going to try to build the best athlete you can, like, that's the ultimate goal, but in the meantime, why not build the best person you can as well? And then it's a great cycle because that actually will help the performance. So I love I don't know, I'm definitely an advocate for that side of the theory.
Well said. Duncan, any final thoughts as we wrap up this topic for the day?
Well, number one, thanks again for having me on here. This has been a hoot. Getting a handle on the whole Google Hangouts has been a riot. I think in terms of final thoughts as it relates to athlete development, I think, if I was somebody watching this and I'm like, well, where really do we go from here? I think the key message that I'd want to get across is that, and just to tie on to what Shannon was saying, is that you are not negatively impacting performance in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you're augmenting performance if you're taking an active interest in managing your transition into elite and professional athletics. You're not negatively impacting your career if, while you're playing elite or professional athletics, if you're actively seeking ways to leverage your career so that you can have a prosperous transition. And that's the whole key, is if you can manage that entire experience, cradle to grave, by engaging and having a plan and working a plan beyond the playing surface, is that you are going to dramatically improve what's taking place on the playing surface. And I think that's the message that I'd want to get across, is that by putting together a particular program for an organization or a specific athlete, you can have massive impact on that individual or that organization and have outcomes that are outsized to the investment. So I think that's the message that I want to hammer home, is that this is not in any way, shape, or form an inhibitor of performance. It in fact enhances it.
And if people want to learn more about Game Change, where do they go?
Well, we just launched a new website, so check it out, www.gamechange.ca, as in Canada or California. And another great group that I'd recommend everybody checking out is the Professional Association of Athlete Development Specialists, which is a great group. You can learn a little bit more about athlete development there, and that's www.paads.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you as well, and we will continue this conversation, I'm sure, again in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.